450.
Winners in the game, Chris Johnson, Justin Young, and Jake Daniels at 25, 8, and 7,000 respectively. And this will be a welcome sight for Jonathan Little.
You have more than 20, John?
22, I think. Something like that.
Young straddled this pot. Jake made it 450 to go, and it's back over to him. 1,100 to call with Jack 10.
But if New England doesn't cover, I don't know if I can pay at this point. Better leave with money today.
He wants to gamble.
We are playing 50, 100 with a $200 straddle on Poker After Dark. Folds around to Jake Daniels. Good, strong, loose, aggressive, battling player. He raises it up to $450. Folds around to me in the small blind. I have about $22,000, and I opt to 3-bet the pocket aces to $1,550. I think in reality, I could probably go even a little bit bigger, but if you think your opponent's raising a little bit too wide pre-flop, you don't really mind if they stick around, right? And I do think that Jake will start to fold out a lot if I make it something like 2,200, and I don't want him to fold out, especially in this scenario. So I think going to something like 1,500 is fine, especially if he does not know that I am perhaps sizing down exploitatively. Now, if you normally make it, let's say 2,200 with most of your 3-betting range, but then you make it 1,500 with aces, you become really easy to play against. But I've not played a ton with Jake, and he probably does not realize in this scenario I'm sizing down because I haven't done a ton of 3-betting in this game, right? So this is a spot where I definitely like making it this size and trying to get action. Back around to Jake. He calls with the Jack 10 offsuit, which is splashy, but probably okay in position. And we head to the flop.
Spins the wheel and comes up top pair, which is problematic for him.
1,500.
Just to make sure I heard you right, trip to what?
What happened?
Trip to the box.
Oh, box. You said Bach.
Man, make a trip to Bach.
Trip to Bach.
No, no trips to Bach.
Maybe you can get even at Baccarat.
I feel like Sam doesn't gamble outside of.
I've done a few times, not often.
Oh,
Yeah, you don't gamble. I don't think.
I
Right?
fired 100x.
The flop comes 10, 4, 3, 2 hearts. I have no hearts. This is a board that is somewhat likely to change on the turn, which means you should usually bet using a slightly bigger size. But if you consider the range that Jake actually has, he's not going to have a whole lot of cards in his range that interact with the 4 or the 3. This would be very different if the board was something like 10, 9, 3 with 2 hearts. Then you definitely want to bet using a larger size, assuming you want to bet, or maybe even put in the check raise. But I think on this board, we can bet frequently and small. Kind of like on the flop, I use a smaller re-raise size because I wanted to keep Jake in. Now on the flop, if a default continuation bet is something like 1,000, I don't mind sizing it up a little bit because, again, your opponents are not going to know your default bet sizes in these scenarios. And in the spot, if Jake has anything, he's just not going to fold. So I think we can size up just a little bit and get a little bit more money in the pot, which will allow me to more easily play a large pot by the river when I feel inclined. So I bet 1,500. Jake makes the good standard call. I think some people in this scenario raise thinking they probably have the best hand and they don't want to get outdrawn. But if you consider my range, I don't actually have a whole lot of hands that interact with the 4 or the 3 either. And if Jake is behind, I'm literally never folding. And if Jake is ahead, well, I'm going to fold out a lot of the hands, especially if they are unpaired if I get raised. So very, very easy call from Jake. And we head to the turn.
Perhaps a few times.
Yeah, that's not really
Drinking and stuff.
gambling.
Yeah,
Takes his
but
time.
it's pretty big, but yeah, it's.
Before eventually deciding to call the $1,500 flop bet. Extra 3,000 into the pot, 7K in the middle now. Little adds a wheel draw to the mix.
3,200.
Fires again just south of half pot.
Call.
The turn brings the 5 of clubs, which is an interesting card because sometimes this card will interact a lot with your opponent's range, and other times it will not. Whenever there's a raise and then a 3-bet and then a call, you're not so worried about your opponent having a whole lot of combinations of 5-4 or 5-3 or 7-6. They could have the suited hands, but there's really not all that many combinations of those. And in this scenario, it's just far more likely Jake has either a 10, some sort of pair, or a flush draw. And against that range, I really, really, really want to bet, because if he does have a hand like pocket eights, he's not going to put any more money in the pot if I check, but he will continue if I bet. Same thing may even go for a 10, because if he bets a 10 and gets raised, it's miserably bad, and obviously if I'm checking hands like aces, he doesn't want to be betting with a 10, right? So for that reason, I think I probably just want to continue betting in the spot. So the pot in this situation on the turn was 6,500, and at this point I have 18,000 behind. I think I probably should have bet bigger than I did, looking back now. I realize why I don't necessarily want to bet all that big, because even though the board is very coordinated and may change a lot on the river, I'm not really worried about a whole lot of those hands. So I think this is a spot where I probably should have gone more like 4,500 instead of 3,200, because that would have better set up a river shove on various rivers. When I bet 3,200, notice in this scenario, if Jake does call, pot's going to be 13,000, and I'm going to have 15,000 left, which is a touch more than the size of the pot, which may induce some folds. It's tough to say. But I do think I probably should have gone a little bit bigger on the turn than 3,200. So a little bit of an error by me, probably. Over to Jake. Easy call. You can't go around folding the top pair. It's definitely an annoying spot, because now a lot of my bluffs have some equity. Like if I just have a random ace, right? All those hands now turn a decent amount of equity with a gut shot. And obviously Jake could still be beat by better hands. But I don't really see how I can fold in this scenario, especially getting pretty good odds in position. You just have to call and go to the river.
Jake hanging in there. Needs help.
2 players.
It's not there.
The river brings the 4 of clubs. I want you to take a second and think about what you would do in this scenario in my shoes with a $15,000 stack when there is 12,900 in the pot. Should we check? Should we bet small, like 2,000? Should we bet medium, like 6,000? Should we bet big, like 10,000? Or should we rip it all in? Take a second, pause the video, and write what you would do in the comment section below.
Board pairs on the end.
$10,000.
Little firing 10K into the 13-4, and Daniels just needs to decide whether or not to go bluff catching.
I end up going for a 10,000 bet, but I'm not actually sure that is the right play, although it could be, and we'll discuss why. First things first, should we ever check? The main time you should check is when you expect your opponent to have a lot of busted draws that will obviously fold if you make any bet, but will very likely bluff if you check. Now, given Jake's a good, strong player, I certainly can't look at him and tell he has a busted draw, right? So because of that, that thought kind of goes out the window, because you have to remember Jake could easily have a 10 or an underpair that may decide to call if I put in a bet. Now, the question becomes, how much will a 10 or an underpair reasonably call? If you go for a tiny bet, of course those hands are going to call, but you may be losing a lot of value because you don't end up getting a lot of money in. Like if your opponent has a 10, they're probably going to call more than 2,000 or maybe even more than 6,000, right? 2,000 does have some merit, though, if you think it may induce your opponent to make a thin value raise with a hand like King 10, or perhaps a bluff with a hand like a busted flush draw. So small definitely does have some merit. I think 6,000 and 10,000 are both rather interesting sizes in this scenario. Typically, you want to be betting very big with your hands that are almost always good. And in this point, I do think aces are almost always good. Of course, he could have a random 4, right? That certainly is possible. The most likely 4, though, is ace X suited. And notice he cannot have ace 4 of diamonds because I have that. And he also can't have ace 4 of hearts or clubs because those are on the board. So there's really not a whole lot of ace 4 suiteds. And if he does have 5-4 suited or 4-3 suited, those are also blocked to death by the board, right? So this is a spot where I'm really not worried about him having a 4 all that often at all. So I pretty much have the nuts. So in this scenario, I think the right play for me is to either bet tiny or to bet very big. Now, what is very big? The thing is that some players will think anytime you bet over the size of the pot that you just must have the nuts. That said, I don't think Jake's that kind of player. Jake's the kind of player who's going to look at this overbet and think, all right, he may be trying to get me to fold. Or he may think that Jonathan Little is a little bit on the tighter side. I know he's watched some of my videos, he's told me this, and I think he thinks I'm generally not too insane. And in this game, to be fair, I had not been playing all that insane because I had not gotten very good cards up until this point. It's always good when you get aces, right? So anyway, I don't think he thinks I'm all that insane. So this is a rough scenario where I think if I shove, he may overfold. But I definitely do want to bet big. So I went for the 10,000 bet. Maybe there's some thought of if I go 10,000, maybe he's going to level himself into calling because he thinks that that's me making a big bet to try to get him to fold. It's tough to know because I don't know Jake all that well. And for that reason, these thoughts don't really matter all that much. I think the right play in this scenario, though, is to either bet tiny or to go all in. I think either of those plays are fine and good. And if we do bet tiny here on the river and we do get shoved, we're obviously going to call it off. I go for 10,000, though. Let's see what Jake does.
He's already got 6,200 invested. For a non-full-time pro, Daniels has some good sniff. And Little only has 5K back, so this is a pot committal sizing. And it's his second bullet, no less.
PokerCoaching.com.
Jake gives it a pretty good amount of thought and finally makes the right fold, which is a bummer for me. I think in this scenario, if I did bet all in, I think I maybe would have gotten called. That said, baby's just always going to fold to a big bet in this scenario to begin with. But maybe, just maybe, I cost myself $13,000. What a bummer. Good job, Jake. That's going to be it for today. Thanks to Poker News for putting this video on their channel. Also, thanks to PokerGo for letting us use their content. I appreciate it. It's always fun to get to go to the PokerGo studio and play. It's an amazing time. And if you ever have the opportunity, I definitely recommend you do it. If you enjoyed this video, do me a quick favor. Click the like and subscribe buttons down below. Also, click the notification bell. If you have any comments, feedback, suggestions, or you just want to say hello, type it in the comment section too. Good luck, have fun, and when you have aces, I hope you get more value than I did.